Hello, let's talk about literature search and analysis. So in this, we will first talk about some general tips on research, purpose of the literature search, finding literature, analyzing literature, and bibliographic managers. Now, what is research? Research is discovering new knowledge. According to Wikipedia, research is creative and systematic work undertaken to increase the stock of knowledge. What that means is there is a certain amount of knowledge that the human beings have as a civilization. By undertaking research, we want to expand that knowledge paradigm by a minute amount. Now, let's listen to a person called Paul Graham. He's a person who started Y Combinator, also a famous startup setup. What he says about literature? He's a person who designed a language called Lisp. So therefore, you can see he has done great contributions to this design of computer languages. I don't consider myself to be doing research on programming languages. I'm just designing one in the same way that someone might design a building or a chair or a new typeface. I'm not trying to discover anything new. I just want to make a language that will be good to program in. In some ways, this assumption makes life a lot easier. So what I want to emphasize here is Paul Graham, who has designed a language, does not say that he did research in trying to design a language, but he just designed a language. The difference between design and research seems to be the question of new versus good. Design doesn't have to be new, but it has to be good. Research doesn't have to be good, but it has to be new. I think these two paths converge at the top. The best design surpasses its predecessors by using new ideas, and the best research solves problems that are not only new, but actually worth solving. So ultimately, we are aiming for the same destination, just approaching it from different directions. See, research has to be new and design has to be good. Although he says that these things meet at some place, I think these are for large companies who have excellent designs, where good research contributes to good design. So in our case, as researchers who are starting and doing academic research, I think our research must be new. Okay, if you think about the dominant KPI of research, we all know that we need to get publications. Our research is measured by the number of good publications that we have. But actually, however, we know that the purpose of making a person an independent researcher is what is truly important. So after going through a program of research, once you're qualified, you should be able to design your own research problems and embark on a research career. Now, why should we write? So we produce some good work, and that know-how is in our mind, and we want to retain that for the human civilization to be able to use. So that's why, to preserve, we write our literature. And also, other researchers and other groups around the world should be able to replicate what we have done in our work. So, for reproducibility, also, we have to write our literature. Now, this person, Leslie Lamport, is the one who designed this LaTeX system, which helps us to write papers, theses, and so on in a formatting independent manner, where LaTeX takes care of the formatting. So let's hear what Leslie Lamport says. If you're thinking without writing, you only think you are thinking. So therefore, you can see writing is an integral part of research or thinking. So therefore, it is very, very important that we try to articulate what we are doing while we are doing the research, especially to understand that our arguments are same and complete, and also that we have provided sufficient evidence to establish our arguments. Sometimes when I write down arguments while I'm doing a research, I find out that the number of experiments that we have done or the type of experiments that we have done are not sufficient to establish the point. So then you have to once again go back to the experiment table and carry out those experiments. This is why writing while you are researching or thinking is so important. Now, this cartoon that has appeared in PhD comics shows the importance of doing our literature search early. So the student here is shouting, saying this research is impossible. And the professor shows the latest journal article, which has a title of the paper with the same title you are going to give your research thesis. So, see, someone has already done that. So that's why doing the literature search as early as possible is very important. Now, this slide can be interpreted in a very bad manner when I say good writing is imitation. What I want to show is that human beings have discovered a very beautiful way of making others understand of their research findings. So this is the pattern that the conference papers and journal papers have accommodated or embraced. So we also should perhaps follow this pattern so that it is easy for our readers to understand. That's why it's very important for us to see a few well-known papers in journals and conferences of good repute in our areas of research. One more thing that we should keep in mind is starting with the end in mind. What I mean is this comparison of results in papers in well-known conferences and journals. That means our benchmarks is a must. So it is very important to know what these benchmarks are. And in these papers, what are the top results that they have published? So when we have these minds, numbers in our mind and the structures of tables in our mind, we would also be able to somehow, in the completion of our research, add one more row to this existing table, which hopefully surpasses the existing results. So therefore, it is very important to plan the tables of results before you start the experiments. So when we do that, we know the numbers that we must reach or surpass, the metrics that other researchers have used, and we would be able to give a good comparison of results in our prospective paper. Isaac Newton says, if I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. What this means is we must stand on the platform of the literature so that you can see far. So research designed for a great research paper is then starting with the literature. So now, if you are a novice researcher and you do not have much support to zero in on an area of research, the path that you can follow, maybe not the optimum, is this. So you are a novice researcher and you know a general area of interest. So it is possible for you to do a Google search or a Google Scholar search using the general area of interest and the keywords that you know about that area. Now, within a general area of interest, there will be many sub areas. Then hopefully you'll be able to lock in onto a specific area of interest. But in many fields that are highly researched, even within these specific areas, there are sub areas to which we can pay our attention. So it is very important to find that very specific area of interest. After you find that very specific area of interest, there's something that you should essentially do is find a few recent target papers in well-known conferences and journals. So when you have these few papers, we go through these papers and find the research gap. This finding the research gaps, that means an existing deficiency in those papers, is a very key thing that is required to to embark on a research problem. So this aim of our research is to bridge this research gap with the contribution that we make. So then only we can plan our research work. But however, although I showed that process, we know that we must plan research to solve a grand research problem. For example, creating an agent that reasons like human being. We plan that grand form of research and then take one small sub-problem out of that, and we should be solving that. This is the intrinsic right and natural way to do research, but perhaps because of the lack of resources and support, you may have to resort to the first approach that I showed. All right. So once you zero in on a research area, maybe there are a few things that you should keep in mind. Have you properly laid out your research objectives and hypotheses? And do you have access to the datasets, or are you able to collect datasets? Are you able to run the experiments that are required in your research? Methodology and experimental design. How should this be done? Can you ascertain this knowledge from the existing papers? Or is there a new methodology that you should design? Do you have the sufficient capacity or the support to design this new research methodology and acquire equipment and other resources that you need for that? Do you need new algorithms? Do you need computational resources? If so, do you have sufficient computational resources? And this is especially important in these days where we concentrate on GPU hardware for our research work. Are the evaluation metrics known to you? That means how they measure their results. How can we do the performance analysis? Then how do you plan to compare the results? And do you have to take one contribution of your paper out one at a time and perform an ablation study to show exactly how your research is contributing to the advancement of results? Um, how do you plan to write? What is your thinking? What is the argument that you're going to present in your writing? What is the storyline that you want to have in your paper? And how do you plan to stay current? So, do you subscribe through your social media accounts like Twitter or X to the researchers that are who are there in your area, and do you see their posts, or do you refer to their websites and follow their research work? And how do you plan to stay current in your research work? So I'm going to briefly talk about the structure of a research article, also the hourglass structure. This hourglass structure helps us to start from the broad statements, going to more specific statements, and again broadening out. And this is usually the abstract and the introduction, and then our methodology and results will be much more narrower, and then our conclusion will be slightly broader again. So the structure of a research paper: introduction, literature review, which is optional, it may be a part of the introduction, our methodology, our results, and discussion, optional. It can be a part of the research results and the conclusion. This is the structure of a paper. So, but the order of writing may be different. Some people choose to write their results first. Some people choose to write their methodology first. Usually, they write the conclusion and the abstract last. One of the most important things in a paper to get it accepted is introduction. So you should concentrate more on the introduction and identify the right flow of the argument that would convince your reviewers that the gap exists and this gap is fulfilled by the contribution that you make in the research. All right. So if you think about some problems and try to find answers, first let's take this. Engineering projects primarily focus on application of existing knowledge and methodologies to solve practical problems or develop products, while research aims to generate new knowledge and understanding within the field. Is it true or false? Yes, this is true. Research tries to generate new knowledge. Second one, research projects typically have well-defined timelines, scopes, and deliverables. while engineering projects may involve more open-ended exploration and initiative processes. So this is vice versa. Actually, engineering projects are the projects that have well-defined timeline, scope, and deliverables. So this is false. Thirdly, the primary outcome of engineering projects is the development of tangible products, systems, or processes, whereas research outcomes may include the generation of new theories, methodologies, or discoveries that contribute to knowledge advancement. Yeah, here are the answers. It's true. Okay, so let's briefly talk about the purpose of literature search. So first of all, to provide the backdrop. So what that means is like an actor standing in front of the backdrop of a stage. Now the backdrop, as you may imagine, is black, but the actor may be fair and maybe wearing clothes that are different from the color of the backdrop. So because the backdrop, which is our literature, the actor or your own work can be properly seen. So to provide the backdrop, we use literature. That means when we write the literature review or the introduction, we cite important themes in literature and show their deficiencies so that the research gap is very obvious to the reviewers or the readers. That is providing the backdrop and establishing feasibility. What does that mean? So when you take a research problem and you when you design an approach, anyone can ask, do you have to actually do this and see whether it can be done? Will you make a mistake? So when these questions come into your mind, you go to the literature and find out how other researchers have done this. And if there's evidence that they have been successful in following the general procedure that you're planning to follow, your life becomes extremely easy. You can establish that your research methodology is feasible. Expose the existing gap. So this is very crucial. Remember, our purpose of writing a paper is to fulfill or close an existing gap in research. So therefore, through our literature search, we have to show that this gap actually exists. Once we show that this gap exists, our task is to establish that through our experiments, our methodologies, and in our work, that we actually fill this gap. Then establishing novelty is an important thing. As we listened to Paul Graham, we saw that our research must be new, that our research must be novel. To show that our research must be novel, we should be citing recent papers in well-known journals and conferences and show their techniques and their approaches and show that something that we are presenting did not exist, does not exist. Then to understand the methods, how have other researchers done this? So if they have done it using this methodology A, this same methodology may be useful in our work also. Then understanding metrics means how did the other researchers measure the outcomes of their research? Did they use millimeters? Did they use accuracy? Did they use mean average precision? What is the metric that they used? For example, if you want to measure the rainfall, you do not use liters, but you use millimeters, right? So therefore, there is a logical reason why those metrics are used in those specific areas. So to understand metrics, to measure research, you have to follow literature. Then gauging existing results. You need to gain some notion about the level of results that the other researchers have achieved. Now, this gauging results, existing results, is exactly that. Then there are other uses of literature to be staying current, suggest ideas for research problems, identifying strengths and weaknesses of others' theories and works, identifying theories that can be applied, gathering aspects of presentation work. How do you present your work, literature? So you use statistics or graphs or diagrams, identify outlets of publishing. Where can I publish this? Can I publish this in this conference or in this journal? For all these things, literature is useful. So if you want more details, maybe you can refer to this University of Toronto website and understand what a literature review is. Yeah. So what is literature review is not. So it is not to convince the readers that the writer, that means you, is knowledgeable about literature. It is not a laundry list of previous studies, Smith found, Jones concluded, Anderson states, and so on. This is not only poor writing, but also misses the whole point of effective literature review. Effective literature review is to form an argument to establish the gap. So it is also not a compilation of facts and feelings, um, a report of everything that you have read. Also, one more thing that we wrote is research is literature is not a good is a good servant, but not a it's a very bad master. Yeah. So what is literature review then? It is a dialogue between you and the reader. So in this one, we argue for the validity of the problem statement, and we anticipate the questions that get raised in the mind of the researcher, in the reader. What is your point here? What makes you think so? What is your evidence? And so on. So if we keep on answering these questions that get raised in the mind of the reviewer, we would have established that our research gap. So it is not a compilation of facts and feelings, but a coherent argument that leads to the problem studied or the research gap. So attempts to convince the reader of the legitimacy of your assertions by providing sufficient logical and empirical support along the way. That is our literature review. The reader should be able to conclude, yes, of course. This is the exact work that needs to be done at this time to move forward in this field of research further along. So if that concept rises in the mind of the reviewer, you have won him over and you have established the research gap that you have. Now what you have to do is to show your experiments and establish with your results and with your conclusions that you have filled this research gap. Okay, a brief quiz again. What may not be a section in a research article? So, conclusion, discussion, method, introduction, those are the answers. So, discussion may not be a part because it may be a part of the results. What is not a reason for doing literature research? Establishing now to establish feasibility to provide a backdrop, expose a research gap, demonstrate the knowledge in the field. That's the correct answer. The literature review is not a compilation of facts and feelings, but a coherent argument that leads to the problems studied or the research gap. This is true. Yeah. All right. So now let's talk about finding literature. Now, there is a certain set of steps that you can take in writing a literature review. In that one, you can see we have to find the relevant articles and we have to organize and then we evaluate associate papers and areas with areas and summaries and then we evaluate and then we go about writing. So finding these articles. So one thing that the students can do is ask their supervisors. Supervisors are experienced in the area of research, then the supervisor should be able to give you, okay, read these 5 papers, read these 10 papers, and you will gain insight into the field of research that we do. Also, know the top journals and conferences in your area. This is an extremely important thing. So I will show you using Google Metrics how I would do to locate the good journals and conferences in a particular area later on. So we had to specify and search. That means we had to know the topic and do a very targeted search, list the questions to be answered, do a keyword search in Google. And if you are sure about the keywords and if you have some notion about the general correctness about the articles that you find, then you can use an AI engine also to look for articles. Of course, know that AI engines can still make mistakes, so be very careful about that. First, we usually use an academic search engine such as Google Scholar or Sitesea. I don't know if it exists anymore. And some well-known chosen keywords to find 3 or 5 recent papers. Do a one pass on each to get a sense of the work. Then read their related work sections. You find a thumbnail or summary of recent work and perhaps pointer to a recent paper. Second, refer to the shared citations within these These are the key papers of research in that area. So what this means is this. So maybe assume that you found several papers that have been published in 2025, for example. So three papers in 2025. And you notice that all these three papers in 2025 refer to one paper that has been published in 2022, an example. So then you will realize that this paper must be important because all these three papers refer to that paper or cite that paper. So this is the shared citation as I have mentioned here. Second, refer to the shared citations within. These are the key papers and researchers in that area also should be in your mind. Refer to papers that cite these papers. So maybe in 2026 also there have been papers that cite these things. You should look at these papers also because you do not want to miss anything that is relevant to your work. Then we go to the websites of the key researchers and see whether they've published recently. Identify top conferences and journals in those areas. Third, you go to the websites of these top conferences and look for recent proceedings. So there's no such a thing called optimal number of references. So depending on your field, depending on the number of papers that your field paper cite, you can get a notion of what is the number of papers that you should cite in your uh, paper. Okay, so these keywords. Then let's look at how to find credible research papers. This is so important. First of all, what are the good journals and conferences? So, what are the major journals and conferences specialized in research in your field? Knowing this is extremely important because there are so many journals and conferences with varying names and varying quality. So, as starting researchers, you must read only papers that are correct and authentic. Otherwise, there's a chance for you to be totally misguided in your area of research. So, do not read new journals or not sponsored by society, at least at a start. Do not read journals that charge money for publishing, at least at a start. Do not read journals that are only electronic or print, at least as a start. So be careful about these metrics. So what are the major journals and conferences specialized in your area? We have to know about the impact factor, the quartile. Hopefully the quartile of the journal is Q1, H index, Google metrics, and so on. Who is the publisher? A scientific society, well-known publisher, a university, or a commercial entity. So for our area, the IEEE is a major publisher, but that is also not sufficient. Knowing that the publication is in IEEE is of absolutely uh, no use, I would say, in the current world where there are thousands and thousands of conferences and journals. So the measures using which you can rank these journals are citations. Of course, they matter. A journal impact factor, we call this impact factor. That specific name is important. High H index, journal citation reports, Simago journal ranks, the quartile. So if we take the impact factor, let's take this one. To understand what impact factor is, in any given year, the 2-year journal impact factor is a ratio between the number of citations released in that year for publications in that journal that were published in the 2 preceding years. The total number of citable items published in the journal during the 2 preceding years. So the impact factor of this year, IFY, is actually citations received in this year for the publications in the last year and the year before. Yeah, that is the impact factor. So H index, so the Hirsch index, I think due to a professor, the H index defines as the maximum H value such that a given author or journal has published H papers that have each been cited at least H times. So for example, if your H index is 10, that means you know that you have at least 10 papers that have got at least 10 citations each. 10 papers with 10 citations. Is your H index being equal to 8? 10, I'm sorry. So what is H5 index? H5 index is the H index for articles published in the last 5 complete years. It is the largest number of H, such that H articles published in 2015 to 2019 have at least H citations, for example. If you're talking about the 2020 H5 index. Excuse me. H5 median is also there, so we will not talk about it. So here is a quick question. What are criteria for establishing credibility of your publication? Impact factor, quartile Q1, Q2, reputation of the publisher. Let's carefully think about this. BH index, Google metrics, authors being from a good university. Quartile Q1 or Q2, high H index being within Google metric. Impact factor being high, quartile Q1 or Q2, high H index. Answer is D. So some other answers just say Google metrics, but Google metrics must be high, right? It must be in a high forum. So being within Google metrics is not sufficient. Just H index being there is not sufficient. Okay. Let's do this question also. A journal published 20 articles in 2018 and 80 articles in 2019. If there were 200 citations in 2020 for the articles, for those articles in the last 2 years, the 2020 year, 2-year impact factor is. So to the 20 plus 80 articles that have been published in 2018 and 2019, there have been 100 citations in 2020. So therefore, the impact factor is 200 citations, I'm sorry. The impact factor is 200 divided by 100, it is 2. So I have given a list of databases and indices. So Web of Science, previously Web of Knowledge, is a website which provides subscription-based access to multiple databases that provide comprehensive citation data for many different academic public disciplines. Journal citation report is important. Master journal list is important. Scopus is useful, and Simago is useful. So we will briefly look at Google Scholar is useful. Some of these things. First of all, locating top journals and conferences in your area. So you type Google Metrics, and it takes you to the Google Metrics. You can see the topmost forums in that right now. So starting with the Nature and the top most publication of computer science, the CVPR conference, and then others are there. So you go to the subfield, maybe engineering and computer science. And within that also there are subfields. Let's say your subfield is signal processing. These are the top publications. So the top 3, 4, these are very reliable. You can see the H5 index also. So if your area is computer vision and pattern recognition, which is mine, you can see the CVPR conference at the top with the highest number of H5 index, and European Conference of Computer Vision, International Conference of Computer Vision, and so on. So I think you can understand that how you go into a subcategory, find out the top journals and conferences. So journals have regular issues. That means every year it will have 6 issues or 12 issues every month. You can submit at any time. They will have names such as a journal, transactions, and so on. Conferences, these are annual meetings that happen. In some fields, conferences are more important, but usually journals are more important, repeated. But in computer vision, in which I work, conferences are more important. So, though that's the difference between journals and conference. So, if you go to artificial intelligence, you can see neural information processing systems is the #1 ranked conference. International Conference of Learning Research is International Conference on Learning Representations, I'm sorry, is the second highest forum. It's a conference. Then let's go to Simago. So you go there and maybe to see whether your journal is good or bad, maybe you can search for one. So I have searched for many, so I will search for neurocomputing. Because we have several papers there, I have searched for that, I think. So if you go there, so you have to verify that it is the same journal that you are looking for. They're published in Netherlands, that's the correct one, I know. So it will take a few minutes to show up. Okay, so you can see, I think it doesn't take time. I did not click properly. I'm sorry. So each index is given. So it's quartile one. So you can see if you take artificial intelligence, it has been quartile one from 2015 and so on. In computer science and applications, quartile one. In cognitive neuroscience, it's quartile one. So it is, you can see it's a good one. Okay. So here is a picture so that you can know how to access this. And the subcategories also I have shown. So there are things called predatory journals, and these are very bad. They are bad journals. So you do not want to uh, list ever list your name in with one of these journals. It's a black mark for you. The guarantee is publishing in a short duration, say weeks. Probably charges money for publishing. Perhaps no peer review. Peer review means when you send a conference paper or a journal paper to a forum, they will send it to your colleagues. Actually, they are fellow researchers, of course, usually unknown to you, and they will read your paper and give their decision whether it is going to get be accepted or not. So this is called peer review. So usually the associate editor or the area chair will read the reviews of those reviewers and makes the decision. Perhaps they post everything that they get. Website itself containing mistakes. Published papers containing silly mistakes. Newly created indices like impact index. Impact factor is there. Impact index is not the correct name. Lack of comprehensive instruction for authors. No indication of peer review process. Listed in peers list. So this is a list of bad predatory journals. Now I don't think it's there. Lack of a latex template. Usually good journals and conferences will have a latex template for the authors to perfectly type out and present their work. So when you start reading a paper, one thing that we must understand is we should not start reading from the very first sentence to the very last sentence. You should go for a hierarchical approach. It's a three-phase process. First pass give you a general idea about the paper, 10 minutes. Second part lets you grasp the paper's content, but not in detail, 1 hour. Third pass helps you understand the paper in depth, 4 or 5 hours of for beginners. Usually it takes more time for me actually for paper reading, so paper understanding. First part is the bird's eye view. Carefully read the title, abstract, and introduction. Read the sections and subsections, but ignore everything else. Read conclusions. Glance over references mentally, ticking off once you already used. So one thing is some of these instructions may be true for new researchers, so maybe not important for experienced researchers. As a second pass, read with care, ignore what you can, look at figures, graphs, results. If the work is a work shoddy or excellent, make relevant unread references, mark relevant unread references for further reading. At this and at this stage, the reviewer should be able to summarize. So the final pass is the bird's eye view. Carefully read the title, abstract, and introduction. Read the sections, subsections, headings, but ignore everything else. Read the conclusions, glance over references, mentally ticking off once you have already read. So third pass, fully understanding. To fully understand the paper, particularly if you are a reviewer, require a third pass. The key to the third pass is to attempt to virtually re-implement the paper. After this, the innovations and failures are fully identified. So let's briefly talk about analyzing literature also. Uh, In literature, we have to keep the focus on the phenomenon. That is how you project power and authority. A common problem uh, is that, uh, especially with the new researchers, they give away their own authority. So as a researcher, we need to accept that you are in charge of the study, and that in the case of dissertation, you will be likely the worst topmost authority in that field. One way of giving away authority is to defer your authority to others in the review. Assuming, for instance, that because Emily so on and so on said something, it is necessarily true. You need to adapt a critical perspective in reading work of others. The main reason why sentences beginning with Jones found and so on are bad is because they transfer the authority or the power to another researcher than retaining with you. Okay, so now let's take an example. Read this example. It's an easy example. Illuminations Datus 2010, it's a fictitious character, conducted a study on the effects of seasonal light on major depression by comparing the rates of depressive illness among residents of Seattle and San Diego during different times of the year. He hypothesized that there would be more depression in the northern city than the southern city and more depression during the winter than during summer. His findings confirmed his hypothesis. So you can see when you read this paragraph, you realize that it is just repeating what Illuminators has said, and the total authority of that statement is with Illuminators. The strategy is to develop a theme and then cite the work of relevant authors to support an argument. The argument, provide noteworthy examples or counter examples. So you can see in our literature search, rather than going through a list of authors, author one said, author two said, that so, we must go through aspects, write the aspect, and cite several papers to support in support. So, critiquing a research article, assuming that the paper is, of course, correct, uh, we have to maintain a critical perspective, evaluating the study on its own merits and in comparison with other studies on the same or similar problem. Does the methodology warrant a conclusion? Question the generalizability, that is, limitations. Comparison must be fair. Also use professional language. So, we can consider these aspects in critiquing. You can critique the problem definition. Is the problem definition correct? Is the application domain correct, or can there be many other application domains? Is the theory valid? Is the methodology correct, or can there be any other way of doing that? Is the data set good, or is it matching the conclusion that they are trying to make? Or are the performance metrics good? That means has this new paper been able to surpass existing results? Yes. So you can do this brief assessment on your own. Think about how you can critique them. Then let's briefly look at the background literature, relevant literature versus very relevant literature. Now think about a zoomed out picture of this scene. So this is the background literature, then little bit zoomed in and very well zoomed in. So this is background literature. You can see what this is, and the relevant literature and the very relevant literature. So in your paper, abstract introduction, literature review method, and results and conclusion are there. So if you think about the background, they will belong in the introduction. Then relevant literature, introduction, literature review and methods. If you take very relevant literature, literature review, methods and results. So it may appear in the introduction. I'm not saying it does not appear in the introduction. So this is the general format that we should follow. Keeping in mind that general to specific to general architecture is that we advocate for a paper. There are things for similar or paradigm shifting papers. So, for example, the Alex that talked about CNNs is one of them, and so on. So, So let's talk about the plagiarism also. Plagiarism is the use of another's work or words or ideas without attribution. The word plagiarism comes from the Latin word of for kidnapper and is considered a form of theft, a breach of honesty in the academic community. So you should never again, you should never do uh, these kind of things and plagiarize. Three main categories: using sources language without quoting, using information from sources without attribution, and paraphrasing a source in a form that stays too close to the original. So always cite in these cases when you quote two or more words verbatim or even one word in a way unique to the source. When you introduce facts you have found in a source. When you paraphrase or summarize ideas, interpretations, conclusions that you find in a source. When you introduce information that is not common knowledge or that may be considered common knowledge in your field that the reader may not know it. When you borrow a plan or structure of a large section of a source's argument, example, using theory from a source and analyzing the same three cases studied, case studies that the source used. When you build one on another's methods found either sourced from the collaborative work or a lab in a lab. When you build on another's program in writing, computer code, or not commonly known algorithms, when you collaborate with others in producing knowledge. So, can you use your own papers in subsequent papers? Yes, you can, but you have to stay aside. If you do not cite, it will be called self-plagiarism. So, when we have the collection of papers, we should put them uh, in a database. This is a good practice that every researcher must keep to himself or herself. You can use reference managers like EndNote, Reference Manager, RefWork, or Mendeley, or you can use just a text file. I use text file, but Mendeley and so on are very useful. I'll show you a picture of that. So then citation styles are there. IEEE citation style is different. They use bracketed numbers, and then APA, MLA, Chicago, Harvard, these are different. So you should be careful about that. In Microsoft Word also you can do that. So you can say I have selected the IEEE. Here, so you can have to usually manually populate the database of papers. Um, Maybe it is possible to import, but I do not know that. Yeah, so here's a picture of Mendeley. If you want to use this as a bibliography manager, it is very useful. I think you can categorize your papers also and write notes and so on and export them to a Word format or the BibTeX formats as I think. So if you briefly summarize literature search, purpose is to know the state of the art to provide the background. Literature is a congruent argument. It projects your authority by taking themes and going through the themes rather than just citing authors. Uh, we have background literature, relevant literature, and very relevant literature. And we understood where to cite and writing styles, citing, and bibliographies, we briefly understood. So thank you very much.